Hi, thank you for joining us at SFFCon, the Science Fiction Fantasy Convention this year on the 11th through the 13th of June. Yes, we are still in June 2021. I am your moderator, Seska Small, and we have with us Jeffrey, Christina, and Anthea. I'm getting it. I've been practicing it off screen. And we are presenting new spins on classic fantasy elements. Did I change the title on us? And first of all, we're going to let Anthea and then Christina and Jeffrey introduce themselves because they know themselves way better than I know them.
Hi, I'm Anthea Sharp, and I write USA Today bestselling fantasy, and I throw some science fiction elements in as well. I also really love to play with fairy tales and incorporating fairy tales into my work. My newest book, White as Frost, is pulling from Snow White and Rose Red, that fairy tale. And I also have written Game Lit before that was even a thing. So I'm excited to dive into this panel.
I'm Christina Gruhl. I'm the author of the In Blood and Fire series. I'm a brand new author, just published this year. I write Gaslamp. Thank you. I write Gaslamp Fantasy, which is kind of like a Victorian novel and a high fantasy novel. Had a one-night stand, and their baby is my book.
Sounds great. Hi, I'm Jeffrey L. Kohanek. So I write epic fantasy. I have 3 series out, 2 in this world called Iselia, and then another one in a world called Wizardoms. And then I'm in the middle of a sequel series for that Wizardoms series. So, yeah, I'm like working on book 18, and I just keep going.
Wow, that's a lot of books. That's a lot of words. So I always get amazed when people hit double digits with books. So color me impressed. What does a trope mean? I guess the first thing when we're talking about tropes is let's get a common definition of what does that mean to you as an author or even as a reader, because I assume you all read too. We're going to go in reverse order just so everybody gets a turn at going first. So Jeffrey?
Okay. Yeah, from my perspective, a trope is it's kind of like the authors that came before us. They've established some norms that people expect in fantasy, for instance. So whether it's the hero's journey or like that's a storytelling thing, right? But it could be something very specific, like, well, elves, they live in the woods, right? And elves have a certain kind of magic. Well, tropes, the readers come in with an expectation for the trope, and you can take that trope and meet that expectation, or you can alter it. Yeah.
And Christina?
I kind of have to agree with Jeffrey. Said it pretty well. I mean, it's like he said, the people that have come before us, you get, his example was, the hero's journey. But like with a lot of fantasy, at least in the early ages, we got a lot of the, old person comes and tells somebody that they're destined to be a hero and they have to go on some epic journey.
The chosen one.
Yes, the chosen one. Yeah, the chosen one is but you always know in the beginning of the book who the chosen one is. It's very rare that you get the chosen person is revealed as the story goes on. So yeah, tropes are just things that you start reading a story and you automatically go, oh, that's what this is about. It's this trope, or it's, you have expectations that are set up.
So there's almost like fast world building.
Yes. Yeah.
I found them particularly useful as a reader, or the one time I wrote a short story for setting up a short story without going into a lot of detail.
Yeah.
But you're nodding your head. So do you want the next question or do you want to answer this one?
Oh, I will definitely answer this one, which is, I really love how, Jeff, you said, elves live in the woods. That's a trope, or elves are tall, willowy, and dwarves are short and squat. And right. You can play with that too, with the reader expectation. Well, no, in this world, the dwarves are all tall and willowy. But for me, I think I love these questions and just the whole topic, because I think there's sort of this blurry space where there's a trope, which is like, the village lad finds the dragon egg, and he's obviously going to be the chosen one, go forth in the world, have the heroic adventure. So that's like a fantasy trope. Then there's a theme, which they go outside of genre, like coming of age. You can have coming of age in fantasy. You can have coming of age in literature, like literary novels, contemporary, young adult. So, and then you have the archetype, like you said, the hero's journey, which is just an overarching archetype that you can find in story after story after story, regardless of genre or subgenre. So it's fun to kind of think about all of those things that play into reader expectation.
And as you were talking about the elves thing, one of the novels I have planned in my universe is a world where I'm gonna have elves, but all of the traditional stuff that you see, none of it's going to be there. And the scary part about that is, readers go in expecting something, and are they going to wig out when my elves are not tall, thin, and willowy and ethereal?
I think that sometimes it matters on how much they've read away. Like, I find for me, I've read so much fantasy and so much epic fantasy that I got kind of bored with it until I picked up Davis Ashura has an epic fantasy out, the Cast and the Outcast, and he pulls from his heritage as an Indian, and he pulls in all of this wonderful stuff that really brought and revitalized it to me. So I think it just depends on sometimes the reader, but you'll find that niche, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a bit about what the power of these tropes are. That is world building, is quick. You bring in people who are familiar with it. Can a trope in and of itself be a genre, though?
Yes.
Okay.
So, or a subgenre. A
subgenre,
sure.
really. So, because
I think reverse harem is a good example of a subgenre that's very strong. In Kindle Unlimited, within a certain niche, and it's reverse harem. There's one woman, there's lots of guys, and
it is a trope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so, I had not thought of that one.
Yeah, Amazon hasn't recognized that as a subgenre yet, but we all know it, right?
Yeah.
I think there are definitely people who go very specifically looking for those.
Oh yeah.
I will totally admit that when I stumbled upon it, and I was very surprised, and I was like, okay, well, the world building is really good. I wasn't expecting that.
And it's all across the board. I think another one, and again, this is a kind of the Kindle Unlimited super subgenres provide a really interesting little breeding ground. Academy is another one where yes, there's bigger books, like Harry Potter is an Academy book, but Academy has come to kind of mean the shorthand of like usually paranormal elements, the romantic elements. But
yes, yeah, I think you're definitely right on that one. I just realized that it was one. I don't normally shop on Amazon for my books, I will admit. So the entire subgenre thing was all very like, whoa, for me. I'm like, that's a subgenre. Are you sure? Are you sure that's not just like a shtick? So, but I'm not going to poo on it, because it's definitely, when you look at something like Amazon, where it's just so big, and you can go down those rabbit holes because you don't have the bookshelf to look at to organize it. It can be helpful, but as we've wandered off our trail, sorry,
that's all right.
But what are your favorite tropes to work with? Well, Christina, because you haven't gone first yet.
Drawing a blank here. I really going to the reverse harem thing. So one thing I've done in my books is the guess you would call them the bad guys. The leader of the bad guys actually has 2 harems, if you want to call them that. There's a group of men who cannot leave the temple. They work for her, and they can only breed with the priestesses of a certain line. And so the big bad guy actually has control of who does who and the lines. So that reverse harem is an interesting one. I also play a little bit with role reversal. So, you would think in a Victorian-esque novel, you would see a lot of patriarchy. I actually have one country where it's the exact opposite. So you have basically how women were treated in England in like the 1200s is how the men are treated.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of just highlighting, because a guy reading something set in that country is going to go like, whoa, this is not cool. But if you think about it, that's the journey that those men are going to embark on to gain their independence is one that we as women have been fighting for centuries. So that's the trope that I enjoy, is kind of the role reversal to just highlight different things.
So you took your trope from, instead of being just about the story, to I'm going to use this trope to build my world.
I used that trope to build one society in my world.
Okay.
So Panarius, one of the 5 major countries in my world that are discovered, it is all a female-driven society. Men can't learn to read unless they're given permission by their wives. They can't travel anywhere. They have to actually have like a written document from whatever woman has power over them, their wife, their mother, to leave their home and travel without the company of their wife.
So really just taking that traditional and then turning it around is
it's been very interesting to explore. So far, Panarius has only had a small part in my current series, but one of the eventual spinoff series that I'm going to do is one of the princesses from Lithonia, which is the main country, marries into the Panarian royal family. And so we're going to get her perspective in moving into this country and the culture shock that she gets of coming from a place where she had to obey her father. She had to ask his permission to do things, to now suddenly being the person that has the power.
So, Jeffrey, what are some of your favorite twists?
Well, because I write epic fantasy, I tend to take some of the most common and strongest tropes in epic fantasy, and then I will twist them to fit my world and to give them their own, like a different background. Basically fits the narrative. So, for instance, so in my Wizardums books, you have elves and dwarves, but they've been away from human society for so long, humans don't think that they're real, right? Mm-hmm. So they just think they're myth. And when you finally get exposed to your first dwarf, he ends up being kind of tall for a dwarf. So he's like 5 feet tall, but he's completely hairless, not a hair on his entire body. And he's very shy and introverted. So he has actually been cast out from his underground home. And because he never fit in with his people in the first place. And one of the things these dwarves do is they mine for gems, and then they sacrifice those gems to like lava flows for their god. Well, he hid them because he had some compulsion where he loved the gems and thought they're precious. Well, that got him booted out, right? So you've got humans, and you've got this one dwarf who doesn't look like a dwarf because he's kind of tall and he's completely bald and hairless in this human world, and he's completely clueless. He has no idea what's happening, right? Because he's never seen the surface world. So he's part of the story. Same thing goes for elves. Like I kind of create my own background, my own reason why the elves are the way they are and the way it works, right? So these races that everybody knows from, Lord of the Rings, for instance, right? I give them my own flavor. For instance, the elves, any touch of metal, kind of like this is like a Fae thing, right? They can't touch
Iron,
metal, right?
yeah.
Right. So that's something that these elves, they can't touch metal. They live in the trees. They have, in fact, people in history call them cultivators, and they call the dwarves makers. So they don't even have that traditional name until later on. But anyway, so the elves, they have the ability to make trees grow and listen to the trees, and they're very connected with nature, but they can't wear metal. But if you look at like Tolkien, he had them wearing armor and they had swords and stuff. Well, so I've kind of like very cleanly break it off and make my own race, but it's still familiar. They still have the pointed ears, and they're still tall and willowy and fair skin and gold eyes, green eyes, blue eyes, that kind of thing, So that's
and
why
you're, talking about your dwarf, which is the you're so stranger in the strange land trope,
yeah,
right?
totally.
The fish out of water, the outsider, that's just a wonderful trope to work with.
Right. In fact, I mean, if you look at in a novel, especially with a lot of characters, you end up having a ton of tropes that are being used and interleaved with each other in different ways. And like that's one that's like a storytelling trope. Another one is there's an acrobat in this story, and she's hard set on revenge, right? So it's your classic revenge theme, but she has to partner with a thief who they have the same end goal. They're both trying to assassinate the same unkillable person, but he's doing it for money, right? And so I got a lot going on. The dwarf is coming along just because he got befriended by the acrobat, and he would do anything for her because she's the only friend that he's really ever had, because he came from an outcast society. So I've got all kinds of things going on, but it's in the end, I mean, these tropes, they're tools to help build a story, but the characters and the plot are like the structures and the beings that kind of make it all fit together.
Okay.
I think the point that Dosiska said, about how
it's tough.
like shorthand for world building, but then you can stretch and play, and they're malleable, which is really fun. And also Christina talking about setting up a trope and then subverting it, and how far can you go? How far will the reader's expectations allow a certain amount of subversion? And part of that is where you find your readers and your niche, of course. And part of it is how jaded your reader is. Like, okay, more elves living in the trees, more door, but that's where we can have fun with that tension as an author. Personally, I love working with fairy tales and fairy tale forms, because they're so archetypal and they're so really sort of ingrained. A lot of people have heard fairy tales, their whole lives. And so that idea of once upon a time, there were two beautiful sisters who lived in the forest, and just playing with that. So one thing I'm doing
change, though, by culture sometimes. So the fairy tales.
Oh, yeah.
Russian fairy tales are scary by the standard that I grew up with.
The Grimm brothers are horrifying, though, if you read the original
early ones.
tales.
I have a really old copy of the Brothers Grimm, and I used to read it when I was a kid and loved it.
Kids are down with like bloody, then they chopped her hands off. It's like then they made her dance in red hot iron shoes until she fell down dead. It's like bloodthirsty little children. But taking a trope like the wicked stepsister and setting up a reader expectation, and then but maybe she's not the evil stepsister after all, just sort of moving the goalposts just a little bit to give that sense of freshness or newness.
Malfeasance, is that the name of the movie? That
Maleficent.
Thank you. Yeah. I don't read and talk very often the words that I read. Can you tell? But that definitely did what you were talking about, where it moved kind of the goalposts. It's like, so she did this really bad thing, but she kind of was like this really messed up and like
she had her reasons. Yeah,
she was kind of abused by the guy. So I mean, not that it makes it right or good, but it definitely shows that there's a different angle to be had.
I explored that a little bit.
Humanizes the villain, right?
Yeah.
Or that if we're going to talk movies, both Maleficent and Frozen took that true love's kiss is going to break the spell idea. But instead of making it the romantic true love in Frozen, hopefully no spoilers, everyone knows the movie Frozen, it's sister love.
By now they can give up on the spoilers.
I have a 4.5-year-old, so I am very well versed in everything Frozen.
But just that great little twist, because you think, oh no, this isn't the right guy, the handsome prince ends up being just a total jerk who's using everyone, right? So that was a great trope twist. And then we have the reindeer dude, Sven, but he's still not like we're not all the way to like that overwhelming true love. So how can we possibly free Elsa? Anna, it's her sister. Her sister's love is the thing that brings it. And then in Maleficent, it's like the motherly love breaks the curse. Yeah. And those are great examples of taking totally tried and true tropes and then just tilting it enough to make a very commercial appealing product.
So and going back to Frozen, so one trope that you often get is the person with the magical abilities is the one that saves the world, but it's Anna in the second one that does the thing that she draws on her inner strength. I mean, she thinks her sister is dead, and she's the one that actually saves the world, which is really cool.
Oh, I think Jeffrey's trying to say something.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So, what I think is important is, tropes we've already talked about, we've established that's kind of an expectation or a norm that readers know about, what they have come to expect. And twisting it is great and it works, but also you just have to, you can't go too far, because if you go too far off the reservation, now the readers lose that familiarity with it, right? So it's really important to figure out what you want to do that's unique, and not overdo it, not get too crazy, so the readers will actually stay on board. So you got to figure out where to walk that line.
So are there any tropes that you just know you've out of personal preference, or you just don't think readers will appreciate it, that you just don't want to mess with?
For me, I think there's things as an author and as a person that I'm not interested in going into, say, particularly dark places, or there's roads you can travel that you can choose or not choose. And for me, I want to write the stories that I love. And so that informs what I'm doing. Yeah,
totally agree with that. And yes, dark moments happen in standard epic fantasy, but there are darker epic fantasies, and there's subgenre called grimdark, right, where it's really ruthless, bad, horrible people doing bad stuff to each other, and it's a hopeless world. I can't write that. Like, I need to write with hope in my stories, even when things are going really bad. The hope and the characters having the drive to try to make things better is super important to me, and I won't ever let go of that.
I get that. N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy, a friend recommended that is a very powerful opening that she uses to it. And I went back and I looked at my friend and I went, if you ever tell me to read a book with that kind of an opening again, you better tell me the opening first, or else I will hurt you. Because it was really hard for me to drive past that opening. I'm not going to give away any spoilers. If you're curious and you don't know for sure, just go download it. It's like in the first 3 pages. It's going to be in the free sample of the ebook. You'll be able to figure out what I'm talking about. But I mean, it's a good series, but it is such a dark series for me. Like, I read it in 2019, and it's a good thing I read it in 2019 because I
not
wasn't able to have gotten through it last year. I had a friend who was reading it, and I'm like, reading that and something similar, and I'm like, okay, for your mental health, go read this, because it's got some of this like dark stuff, but it's got hope in it too, a lot more hope in it, because I do think what we expose ourselves to influences our psyche on this. Mm-hmm. So which is why I gave up horror movies when I had like a 6-month-old. I was honestly convinced while they wouldn't be afraid of it, they did not need to be hearing it either. I'm weird. It's okay. But so you're always making sure to keep hope in there. Christina, is there any tropes that you just don't want to touch because either they're your favorite, so you're going to use them the way they are because they're perfect, or you just think it's just not going to work?
I'm not sure if there's a true trope that I wouldn't touch. Now, a genre I won't touch is romance. I have romance in my books, but
it's a sub-theme.
I don't want to write a story that is focused on a love story. I mean, I have, like you said, it's a sub-theme. Marriages happen. I highlight different types of love and different types of relationships. But I wouldn't ever want to write a book that's just purely about romance.
In you, Anthea?
Well, I write pure romance under a pen name. And I really enjoy it, but it's definitely a different kind of story and a different kind of character arc. It has to be very, very character driven, because it's two people's journey from being broken and not being able to have anything happen together to the point where they do. But I always put romantic arcs in my stories. I'm a real believer in the power of love in all kinds of forms. Yeah. I don't know. It's not always hetero. It's not always sexual. So.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I put arcs in mine. I just don't think that I could do a pure story that's just about romance. I need other things.
So we've gone through a lot of the things that we were going to talk about, but would you say that how many tropes does it take to define a subgenre?
Endless. So I love going and getting totally down the rules of tvtropes.org.
Okay.
Which is, I
think I've been on there. It sounds like a dangerous website.
It's so, for example, just for fun, I went on it, and you can look at fairy tale tropes. And there's also mythical motifs, and there's abduction is love, abusive parents, alien fair folk, an arm and a leg, Androcles lion, animate inanimate object, anthropomorphic personification, attention deficit, shiny. That's just in the A's, right? So there's pages and pages and pages of...
I don't think I've ever heard a diagnosis as a trope. I am ADHD, so finding it a little
The absent-minded professor is a trope, and he's definitely on the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
I had one of those. I looked at him one day and I went, I really prefer to be the only ADHD in the room.
My oldest and my husband are ADHD.
So you understand what it is to live with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned talking about is and we kind of touched on the edge of it, but the new genre. What happens when you take a couple of these?
So, well, actually, before we get into the new genre, as we create them, are we creating new tropes? Because I was thinking about that. The gamer girl trope. Is that really a new trope, or is it just an extension of the book girl trope that Bella was in Beauty and the Beast?
Right.
So are we creating new tropes as our society is morphing and changing?
That's a fabulous question.
And I know, I wish I thought to email it to you guys, but I was literally writing notes. See, I write notes. Yeah. There are people who won't believe me. But, and I'm like, yeah, are we creating new tropes or are we just adapting these older ones?
Okay, so we are.
Bored.
In science fiction, there's the non-gendered AI trope. So you get something like Anne Leckie's books or like Martha Wells' Murderbot, where you have what happens to gender when you have an entity that's maybe not even corporeal, right? So I think that is something that science fiction in particular is really playing with. What happens when you're an intelligent entity without a body? Then how do you deal with gendered issues?
Yeah, well, and A.C. Crispin dealt with some of it when in her Starbridge Academy series, because she actually had, it's the only book that I remember reading growing up where there was a gender neutral pronoun in all of the books. So, because she had gender neutral aliens. So, but I mean, Jeffrey and Christina, what do you guys think about, are we building new tropes in fantasy? I know there's, with more being open about writing like LBGQ, TQ. I get all the acronym messed up. I mean well, but I think some of those are now being included in there, some of those stories, which is good. But are we creating new tropes or are we just adapting them?
Well, I mean, I think the difference between those two things is kind of pretty small, because in the end, I would say the tropes are evolving and when they evolve, they split. So then you have two definitions of something that maybe had the same root, right? And it happens as new norms get established. So, for instance, now we've had a lot of lit RPG books written. Well, they are establishing new norms that these readers that read those kind of books expect, right? And then you can twist those norms. Well, those weren't in, for instance, epic fantasy 10, 15 years ago, but they are now. And, you know, what will come in 15 years, I don't know. Like, but it just kind of keeps morphing and splitting. Okay.
When we're going to cover lit RPG, I think tomorrow, actually, on a panel too. So it's a fun grouping of, it's almost like noir to me, where it kind of goes beyond just science fiction or fantasy as a strict category. So, but it's neat. It's definitely different. It's got its own very unique story mechanics that have developed.
Christina?
Well,
and that pulling your direct text from games of your stat tables or your open chat windows or whatever is, yeah.
Christina, what about you? What do you think?
So, as you know, Gaslamp Fantasy, that term was really coined in 2006. So when it comes to subgenres, it's one of the newer ones. I know lit RPG is technically still is pretty new too. But if you just look it up on Wikipedia, they've kind of gone back and looked at novels that were maybe written 100 years ago and said, this was Gaslamp Fantasy before Gaslamp Fantasy was a genre, like Dracula, things like that. So I have to agree that it's less that we're making new genres and more that that genres are evolving as we evolve.
And do you think that maybe it's also because just there's more body of work in it? Like, I remember when urban fantasy was just a trope that Mercedes Lackey used and like 2 other people. And,
I think that publishing has become more attainable because we can self-publish now. Used to publish a novel, you had to go through a publishing house, and now we can all
become your own publishing house, even in some cases.
Yes,
publishers like things to fit into a box.
Yeah.
Right. So if you wrote a story that doesn't fit in a box where they know exactly who to market it to and how to do it, they don't usually want to jump on those stories.
Yeah, no, I tried to traditionally publish, and I was running into that. I write, not only do I write Gaslamp Fantasy, which is different. It's not a super well known yet, but I also write LGBTQ friendly books, and I also focus on multicultural and diverse. I have brown children. I want my children to see themselves in fantasy. They won't be seeing themselves in my book until they're older because there's things they don't need to read yet. Although my 7-year-old, who is extremely, he can read just about anything, will come in here while I'm working and stand over my shoulder and read out loud what I'm writing. So if he comes in here, I make sure to scroll to something that
I think that was
amazing.
Such a good point, though, about that. By removing those gatekeepers that said, well, here's the little box we've constructed and we don't know how to, there's not a Gaslamp Fantasy spot that we can put your book in, so we're not going to publish it. And that the indies, the new genres, one of the first was new adult. For quite a while, publishers said, oh, well, we can't publish books that fall between that like 18 to 24 age range of someone's coming of age story in there. And then it just blew up. Independent publishers, mostly, writing in a contemporary genre.
Yeah, there is a difference between YA and new adult. I worked at Barnes and Noble, and I did not know there was a difference. I was definitely had a very good explanation and understanding by the end of our shift shelving books.
Somehow the new adult seems to be dominated by romance tropes, right?
Well, I think that's because some of what started first pushing new adult into being new adult was the fact that there was some more mature, romantic and active romance scenes in them.
Explicit, one might say, yeah. And also that you can, it's hard to write super, super sexy about 18 and under, right? Because it just gets a little squicky.
It's weird.
Yeah, but if you age up just a few years, and then it's the whole issues of exploring sexuality, identity, your place in the world. That just it's ripe. So
yeah, I explore that. I have some explicit scenes, but I also have those scenes with older people. I hit the whole gamut between my youngest character, who has an explicit scene, is 19, and I think my oldest is like in their 70s. Because you don't see that very much. But
you do more and more though now, and the indies are driving it. Paranormal women's fiction is the newest subgenre that's coming up, where heroines are 40 and up, and it's
right. I think there's now more tropes available to the adults characters available these days than there were, because it seemed like the only real cool adults in literature when I read fantasy were like, oh, you're really old but still cool, you must be an elf or a dwarf
or a wizard
or a wizard,
vampire,
mysterious Gandalf.
Well, where do you guys see yourselves going with some of these tropes? So we haven't had many questions from the audience, but is there a trope that you look forward to particularly working with? This is probably going to be our last question before we wrap up and let everybody say where you are from, where to find you in the digital interwebs and where to find you next at our con. So what trope do you look forward to working with next? Or want to, and you just haven't figured out a way?
You've stumped us.
I'm sorry.
I aspire to doing some of those envelope pushing, and I don't know if I even can, but taking a look at some of the books out there recently that I have just really loved and admired, like Gideon the Ninth. So you have necromantic magic in space, and so things that sound kind of pitchy and high concept. Oh, if you haven't read Gideon the Ninth,
No, I haven't. I'm going to have to.
Lesbian necromancers in space. So, so taking and just really infusing a freshness, I guess, as an author is what I'm always trying to tackle and trying to do. How do you take a fairy tale and freshen it? Which with my Gamelit pre-runner series, the Phalanx series, which I actually started writing in 2010 before Lit RPG was a thing, I was like, okay, computer game is a portal to the realm of fairy. So that mashup, and that was so fun, and I'm ready to do more of that.
So, Jeffrey or Christina, I don't know.
Well, this is honestly a tough one, but there's one. I'm thinking about maybe writing an urban fantasy series at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen yet, but if I do that, it will be kind of like the trope where you've got like a god or demigod that is, from mythology, bound to Earth, and just it's just around that. But I like writing snarky characters, and so we talked about romance earlier. I like my romance is usually banter romance. For people my age, it's like moonlighting, right? That's my romance. So I like that, where it's just this fun, playful banter, and you can always sense this tension, and eventually the tension breaks, and then, the banter continues. But I will have that be around this character who's stuck with humans. Yeah.
And Christina.
I want to explore kind of gender fluidity in one of my worlds, not having a black white, having that, we're non-binary is really becoming more prevalent these days. Yeah, it's definitely something that until a couple of years ago I had no idea was a thing, and I would like to explore a world where it is the thing. There's nobody identifies as just one or the other. Everyone, like the Native Americans used to have, like, there was one culture that had like 5 different genders, and I want to explore that.
You guys have actually just inspired me. I know what I want to write to trope break. I want to write a paranormal women's fiction with an older heroine who suddenly can see fairies and is kind of chosen one, but when the handsome fae comes to like steal her off into his realm, she's like, yeah, no, I'm not having it.
Love it.
She's independent.
Yeah. And she has seen some stuff, and she's not taking nothing from nobody.
Yeah, she's not the 18-year-old who'll just
I'll follow you into the fairy realm. Yeah.
It'll be fun. You've now given birth to a new book.
I got to take some notes.
Well, as we're wrapping up, and two of you guys have, I think everybody here has more panels in SFFCon, as well as, so can you say briefly, if you don't remember the time, just the title of what you're covering next, maybe, as well as where we can find your wonderful books and you online. So if you have a web page or Facebook, please let us know so that our viewers can find you. Let's go with Anthea, and then we'll go to Christina. And Jeffrey, you get to be the anchor.
So my next panel is actually at 4 on serial storytelling, which will be very fun. No, not like Rice Krispies, you guys. Serial storytelling. And then the Lit RPG panel is tomorrow at 4 as well, and that will be very fun to talk about. You can find me online at antheasharp.com, and my books are available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audio, wherever books are sold, except you might have to order them.
Christina?
My next panel is actually in 14 minutes. It's fantasy world building. Very excited about that one. And you can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group that's Christina Gruhl's and Blood and Fire series. I'm also on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited, and you can also find me at ChristinaGrule.com.
Wonderful. And Jeffrey.
Okay, yeah, I'm the anchor, right?
Not last but not least. You are very important.
As long as I'm included, I'm happy. So my next panel actually is with Christina as well. So I'm in the fantasy world building panel at.
Well, you can run to the panel together.
Oh, there you go. 3 p.m. Pacific. And you can, let's see, info about me. My website is Jeffrey Alcoholic, like right here, jeffreyalcoholic.com. And you'll find me on Facebook too. I have a Facebook page. And then my books, well, my Celia books, my older books, are actually available on all bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc., right? And my newer series, my Wizardom series, so Fate of Wizardoms and Fall of Wizardoms. And by the way, if you're wondering, a king rules a kingdom, a wizard rules a wizardom. Just saying. Okay, so they're only on Amazon for ebook and in Kindle Unlimited. Print can be found anywhere. Audiobook is on iTunes and Audible. Yeah.
Nice. Well, dear watchers, I am Seska Small with the Blasters and Blades podcast. I have no more panels today, but I will be starting off tomorrow with a coffee clutch, which will be an interesting experience for a virtual convention. And then we'll be doing Lit RPG together with Mrs. Sharp. I'm sorry, I call everybody Mr. and Mrs. at some point. I get nervous and do it. And then I have another one, and I cannot remember it right now. So I'm a bad panelist, and I have a great time. And enjoy SFFCon and all the wonderful stuff we have coming up. Thank you.
Hey, if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors, our community at KSM might just be what you're looking for
some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.